FBI and DEA raid Defense Secretary's office. 3,800 arrests, 8 tons of drugs seized. U.S. military.
2,100 kilograms of narcotics were seized in a single morning. 221 firearms were taken in, including weapons that matched military standards. 3,800 suspects were handcuffed during an operation that swept across 17 major American cities. Numbers like these could turn any case into a national headline. Yet this raid unfolded under an unusual silence from every major newsroom because there was one detail the country was not ready to face. The investigation had started inside the United States Department of Defense. People in America were used to a familiar picture. They imagined an enemy crossing the southern border, moving narcotics through dusty deserts and slipping into struggling neighborhoods. In the minds of many, the solution sounded simple: control the border, add more steel barriers, increase patrols, then the nation would be safe. But if the threat did not come from outside and instead lived within the system, wearing tailored suits and a badge with top-level clearance, no physical barrier could stop it. That was what made everyone in the emergency briefing feel a chill along their spine. Someone had learned how to become part of the system instead of fighting against it. To understand how serious this was, we need the larger picture. The cartel had shifted its entire strategy in recent years. It was no longer a street operation selling illegal drugs. It functioned like a financial and paramilitary corporation. It kept its own data archives. It had technical teams handling encryption. It even had insiders planted throughout defense logistics. While fentanyl continued to take tens of thousands of American lives each year, the supply routes were being funneled through military transport contracts. And if not for the historic mistake made that morning in Arlington, all of it would have stayed hidden under the radar. 6:12 in the morning. An internal inspection team walked into a support area assigned to the Office of the Secretary of Defense in Arlington, Virginia. Inspections like this happened regularly. They checked every item to ensure there were no foreign devices, no hidden cameras, and no signs of unauthorized access. They were not searching for narcotics, and they certainly did not expect to find ammunition. They were only looking for anything out of place, anything that did not match the protocol. A technician noticed that the back panel of a printer was slightly misaligned. At first, he assumed someone had repaired it or replaced a part, but when he tried lifting the machine, he realized something was wrong. It was far too heavy. The weight did not match the model or the plastic casing. The team pulled it into the center of the room and scanned it with a metal density reader. The indicators spiked into the red. Movement slowed. This was no longer routine. This was an emergency. Each screw was removed with careful, deliberate hands. When the casing opened, a reinforced steel compartment appeared, crafted with a level of precision no improvised job could achieve. A flashlight beam swept inside, and what emerged froze the air in the room. 3.88 kilograms of cocaine wrapped in industrial plastic. $74,000 in crisp cash, fresh with the smell of ink. And a 6-hour P320 that had already been loaded, the same model carried by law enforcement and military personnel every day. This was not a case of an employee leaving personal belongings behind. This was an infiltration by a cartel into a place everyone believed was untouchable. The person assigned to that workspace was Michael R. Hanford, 43 years old. He had spent more than 10 years in military logistics, a role that rarely drew attention yet allowed him to approve sensitive transport routes. His internal file painted a portrait of stability, strong performance, no scandals, a consistent record of completing every assignment. Colleagues described him as reserved, distant, but reliable. Yet the man viewed as a flawless operator had been hiding items capable of undermining the nation's security structure. When Hanford walked in and saw the sealed workspace, he did not panic. He did not react strongly. He did not even ask what was happening. He simply placed his hands forward as if rehearsed. That silence forced investigators to ask a different question. Was this the first time he had been exposed? Hanford's eyes showed no fear when the cuffs closed. They showed only one message: he was not alone. And whoever stood behind him, if anyone did, held power far beyond a senior office employee. As soon as Hanford was escorted out, technical specialists secured his personal laptop. A private machine belonging to a high-level logistics advisor did not only contain emails or daily files. It could be a doorway into an underground network. Because if someone was willing to hide narcotics and a loaded weapon inside an office at the Pentagon, they were not acting by themselves. The laptop was transported in a secure vehicle to the data decryption facility at Quantico. Multi-layered encryption was attacked by decoding tools. The room was sealed. Analysts sat before their screens, preparing for what no one dared to say aloud. The device could reveal how many others like Hanford existed inside the system. In the hallway outside, a young officer whispered to another, "Who do you think he was working for?" The other replied without turning, "The real question is, how many doors has he already opened?" This was only the first fracture. And when a fracture appears at the heart of national defense, whatever lies behind it rarely stays small. What the FBI was about to see inside that laptop would force the country to question the very people it trusted most. Inside the data analysis room at Quantico, Michael Hanford's laptop finally unlocked after hours of decoding. The first summary sent to leadership contained a single line that chilled everyone. Not an individual act. Then each folder began to appear, outlining a network that had grown quietly inside some of the most secure institutions in the United States. The first folder was labeled Routing Logs. Inside were records from 22 shipments that had been approved with Hanford's digital signature. On paper, they were all repair equipment or replacement supplies for military units. Every document looked legitimate, aligned with procedure, and matched the required codes. But when investigators compared the data with real-world records, major questions appeared. Several shipments never reached their military destinations or were signed for by personnel who had left their positions years earlier. Some shipments vanished mid-route and were reported as delivered, even though no one ever saw them again. One clear example was shipment number 7. Documents described it as radar components sent to an East Coast base. Yet port surveillance footage showed the container being moved to a private warehouse outside the list of approved military partners. The company that owned the warehouse had gone bankrupt. It paid no taxes and had no active contracts, yet it kept operating as if nothing had changed. Anyone looking at the data understood immediately. The warehouse was a front designed to hide the real cargo. The second folder was labeled Reliable. It listed 37 federal and state employees, each with short notes that revealed everything. Keycard, warehouse access, procurement, shipping override. These were not covert operatives or powerful corrupt officials. They were ordinary workers, a clerk allowed to place official seals, an IT technician permitted to issue temporary accounts, a logistics supervisor able to approve route changes. None of them had ever been investigated. They did not stand out, and they did not attract attention. That was exactly why they were chosen. They stood in the right spot to twist one link in the chain, yet stayed invisible to everyone else. Investigators asked a simple question. What turned them into reliable assets? Money, debt, or a small compromise that felt harmless? Because they believed it would not affect anyone? There was no immediate answer, but one truth was obvious. In a system built on trust and interagency cooperation, one misplaced action could open a dangerous gap in national defense. The third folder was titled Housing. These files contained the records of 14 homes in quiet communities across Virginia, Maryland, and North Carolina. From the outside, they looked like typical American homes. A flag on the porch, trimmed lawns, mail picked up regularly. Neighbors believed a young family lived there, or perhaps a retired resident who valued privacy. But access logs told a different story. Multiple individuals arrived at night with no listed residency. Their schedules repeated with exact precision. Small packages were moved in and out within minutes, using vehicles with plates that changed frequently. One of the houses had direct financial links to accounts originating in Mexico through transactions that were split into small amounts to avoid automated detection. On the map, all 14 properties formed a chain of ideal transfer points. Goods entered one house, were divided, then rerouted through legitimate channels. 3 folders, 3 pillars of a system: routes, personnel, and safe houses. Each piece had its own method of concealment. Every participant knew only one small fragment, enough to perform their task without understanding what they were enabling. And Hanford was only one gear in the machine, the first to be exposed, but not the only one. The report closed. A security officer looked up and spoke slowly, as if forcing the room to swallow the truth. If they reached the Pentagon without us knowing, how many other doors have already been opened? No one answered. That silence was the most alarming part. Moments after Hanford's laptop revealed the network's 3 pillars, a federal command issued an order containing only 3 words: strike all targets. No location could be warned. No one knew how many minutes remained before hard drives were destroyed. Evidence disappeared behind locked steel doors, or suspects fled into the night with false passports and allies waiting. If one link sensed danger, the entire network would collapse inward. Every team had to move at the same moment. Virginia, 5:03 in the morning, a quiet neighborhood outside Arlington. 2-story homes, trimmed lawns, warm yellow lights decorating windows for the holiday season. No one imagined that behind the calm exterior was a central link in Hanford's network. When the tactical vehicles stopped without a sound, an FBI team moved along both walls of the house, positioning themselves as if they had memorized every brick. The front door burst open under a controlled breach. Gunfire erupted instantly from the second-floor staircase. Rounds cut through wooden beams and sent splinters across the floor. Agents returned fire with precise bursts, pushing the shooters toward the hallway. 1 minute later, shouts of surrender echoed through the house. 3 suspects were subdued on the spot. 2 others, injured, surrendered in panic. Inside the kitchen, behind cereal boxes and soup cans arranged like a normal home, agents found 28 kilograms of methamphetamine along with a label printer used to forge federal seals. This was not only a storage site, it was a relabeling hub that turned narcotics into so-called government cargo. While Virginia secured its first suspects, the Southwest operation shook an entire steel warehouse. Houston, Texas, 5:07 in the morning. A massive industrial warehouse sat far from residential areas. An armored FBI MRAP charged through the main door, tearing apart the heavy metal panels. Inside, cartel gunmen were already positioned. Their gunfire hammered the armored vehicle like hail on steel. Smoke from the shots mixed with the headlights, turning the scene into something tense and chaotic. Agents advanced in a tight formation. They moved carefully, covering each meter, firing controlled bursts to maintain target discipline. When the shooting finally stopped, the warehouse revealed its secrets: 118 rifles, 7 machine guns, and 42 kilograms of cocaine hidden inside fake auto parts crates. This was not just a weapons site, it was a conversion plant where guns and narcotics were repackaged to flow into civilian and military transport networks. The teams had barely begun processing the reports when, more than 1,000 miles away, another chase unfolded across a barren stretch of desert. California, 5:10 in the morning. An SUV sped through the open land of the California desert, leaving a long trail of dust as if the ground itself were being torn apart. Surveillance drones hovered above, keeping uninterrupted eyes on the vehicle. A DHS helicopter dropped altitude and forced a downdraft that made the SUV lose control. The tires slipped. The vehicle spun. 3 individuals inside jumped out and scattered into the rocks. No shots were fired. The tactical team moved in from 3 angles and restrained each person as the sunrise touched the horizon. These were not hired gunmen or logistics experts. They were operators, responsible for guiding the exit routes that moved contraband out of California, the final link before the shipments disappeared from the radar. Their files contained coordinates for a site even more dangerous, a place where the real conflict played out among towering stacks of containers. Norfolk, Virginia, 5:14 in the morning. At a port preparing for its first shift of the day, 6 containers with flawless federal seals were minutes from leaving the inspection yard. But seconds before the truck started, a special response team, supported by K9 units and chemical screening specialists, locked down the area. When the seals were cut and the containers opened, composure vanished. Cash vacuum sealed in tight bricks. Precursor chemicals for fentanyl hidden in large crates labeled as medical supplies. Compressed narcotics ready for distribution across the Northeast United States. Without intervention, all of it would have entered the country's bloodstream within days. As the sun rose, the nationwide operation came to a close. 2.1 tons of narcotics, 221 firearms, and 58 suspects were taken in during the first sweep. Report after report carried the same feeling. Instead of relief, many sensed a deeper abyss had just appeared, because what they captured was only the surface of a massive network. The people carrying weapons, guarding shipments at night, or driving through the desert were the lowest tier. But those who issued access cards, edited transport data, and cleared shipments through secure checkpoints, they were still sitting in their offices, possibly looking out their windows, watching the government's chase as if it were happening on a screen. A veteran agent studied the numbers and said, "We did not dismantle a single ring. We just touched a new system. No one knew how deep it ran, and what waited next would make the question, who was behind Hanford, feel far too small." Data from Hanford's laptop and the evidence taken in Virginia, Houston, California, and Norfolk were assembled on a national map. A DHS analyst examined it and concluded, they did not infiltrate isolated places. They built a parallel system based on our own structure. And to understand how dangerous that system was, we must follow the 3 corridors it used every day across the United States. The first corridor, weapons transport. Several trucking companies in Texas and Tennessee had built strong reputations for years. Clean inspections, stable military contracts, deliveries always on time. But when investigators rechecked the warehouse records in Houston, they found that military parts and illegal weapons had traveled in pairs. One legitimate shipment matched by a disguised twin. The weapons were wrapped in materials that blocked scanners and marked with labels identical to official military cargo. They used defense transport routes to supply those who threatened the nation. No gunfire, no noise. Yet every missing weapon created another gap in domestic security. The second corridor, narcotics and chemicals. On the East Coast, warehouse operations appeared legitimate on paper. Veterinary supplies, medical equipment, laboratory chemicals. But when experts analyzed the contents, they found precursor chemicals for fentanyl at unusually high concentrations, only one small step away from a powerful narcotic. In several cases, the goods traveled through military priority routes, channels trusted completely and rarely inspected. The cartel had hidden narcotics inside shipments meant for the very people working to stop them. And it happened because of one harsh reality. The system trusted itself too much. The third corridor, money flow. Illicit proceeds no longer traveled through shadow banks. They were broken apart and blended into small, legitimate revenue streams. Neighborhood grocery stores, auto repair garages, family-owned nail salons. No single amount was large enough to draw attention. But when analysts connected the numbers, a chain of 3 nail salons in Delaware, Maryland, and Virginia had cycled nearly $9 million in 18 months. No one had to hide money in suitcases. They simply pressed transaction complete like any honest business. Money did not need to hide if it wore a respectable face. When these 3 corridors were layered onto the map, one undeniable truth emerged. The cartel had built a parasitic system operating on the very economic, logistical, and administrative rhythms of the United States. No alarms, no public panic. Just a quiet blending into everyday operations. That was why, the moment the raids began, the reaction from inside the system moved far faster than the response from the government itself. The first sign was escape. On the same day the raids began, a clerk in Maryland, listed under reliable in Hanford's laptop, disappeared. His car remained in the lot. Cameras showed him leaving the office like any normal day, but that night he slipped out the back door with $9,800 in cash and 2 phones without SIM cards, the standard kit of someone preparing to run. The second sign was erasing traces. In San Antonio, 2 technicians attempted to break into a server room. Their goal was to delete or alter routing logs connected to the financial corridor. One officer who arrested them reported that they said, "We were not trying to run. We were trying to save something you have not seen yet." Equipment was damaged, but the data had already been backed up. They reacted instinctively as people who knew they were only parts of something larger. The third sign was sabotage and refusal to cooperate. In Tampa, a senior information engineer locked himself inside a security room, cut a data cable, and tried to steal a classified routing file. He shouted as agents forced the door, "You are too late. The cleanup team already started." It meant another command center had acted before the government even moved. Fingerprint checks linked him directly to the containers seized in Norfolk. Within 36 hours, employees across 9 federal agencies were suspended or placed under monitoring. Sudden disappearances, unauthorized data destruction, unexpected sick leave. These were no longer isolated pieces. This was a system-wide evacuation. Federal leadership called an emergency meeting. In a windowless room in Washington, maps lit the walls, showing hundreds of emerging points across 28 states. A senior agent said bluntly, "We are no longer chasing a cartel ring. We are facing an organized response mechanism." The question was no longer, who helped them? It had become, who is commanding this? One name appeared across multiple reports, yet it was not on any payroll list. No legal record, no public image. The architect in the shadows. He did not carry weapons, he did not visit warehouses, he never touched narcotics, but every major decision in the network passed through him. Investigators believed he controlled the network not through power, but through information. Knowing who would take money, knowing which gaps were easiest to exploit, knowing when to erase data, knowing when to abandon one link to protect the entire system. And he revealed himself in only one way. He acted fast, faster than the government could react, faster than surveillance systems could close in. Fast enough that when agents touched one link, the others had already shifted position. A general at the Department of Defense said in a classified briefing, his voice heavy with each word, "If the enemy understands our system better than we do, this is no longer infiltration, it is control." Silence filled the room. Everyone understood it at once. The mission had shifted from dismantling a network to regaining control of the nation's infrastructure. To win, they had to find the person holding the controls in the dark, before his next command. Within hours of the internal sabotage, the Department of Homeland Security issued an unprecedented order for peacetime. A special unit was formed with authority to review every federal system from the inside out. No jurisdiction limits, no agency boundaries. Their single goal was to identify the individual directing the network from within. When analysts rechecked access logs for internal accounts, one detail emerged like a compass. 4 routing changes attributed to Michael Hanford had actually been signed by another person, Lucas M. Navarro, a federal logistics coordinator with a record so clean it raised suspicion. No debt, no unusual transactions, no risky contacts, 12 years of work without a single error. When he sat in the interview room, he said only, "I keep the system running." No explanation, no fear, as if he believed he was the one doing the right thing. Data showed that every strategic adjustment had passed through him, approving access cards exactly when a link needed to cross a checkpoint, redirecting shipments moments before inspections, removing system errors before auditors reviewed them. He never needed to touch money, never needed to meet couriers. He only needed to know where and when the system created an opening. But what troubled investigators most was what happened after Navarro's arrest. The network did not stop. 3 narcotics shipments vanished from the transport grid. 2 internal accounts thought to be disabled were suddenly reactivated. A data vault in California was wiped remotely. If Navarro was the central controller, then who continued the operation while he sat in a cell? A specialist said in a briefing, "We have identified the first center, but this system may have several centers." Instead of chasing individuals, the government shifted to a reverse strategy. They would lock every position the network could access. A 96-hour technical campaign began quietly. 127 federal accounts disabled in a single morning. More than 300 transport contracts placed under review. 54 warehouses placed under special surveillance. Military transport routes tightened with enhanced inspection. For the first time since the case broke open, the red dots on the map, representing active links, began to shrink instead of spread. Navarro sat calmly until he learned the system was being squeezed. At that moment, he laughed and said, "You can lock the doors, but it is too late to control what passes through them." One sentence, but the essence of everything. The cartel had learned to operate the same way America operated. No external assault, no broken walls. They only needed access. At the time of the report, more than 3,800 individuals had been taken in. Over $240 million in contraband and cash seized. 9 federal agencies compromised simultaneously. But the investigation was far from over, because the most important question remained unanswered. How many parallel networks had already been planted inside the system, waiting for the right moment to activate? Navarro had been exposed. The reliable employees had nowhere left to hide. But the operating pathways the cartel had embedded inside the system were still there. A reminder that a threat did not need to cross a border to endanger a nation. It could sit in an office, use the same systems, walk through the same doors every morning. In the final classified report sent to the White House, one line was underlined. To protect a nation, it is not enough to know who stands outside the door. We must know who holds the keys inside. The greatest threat does not always come from the front line. It comes from those who understand every weakness too well. There is no retreat in this conflict because if America stops for 1 minute, the enemy will advance 2 steps. And while the normal world continues outside, there is one truth no one can ignore. Hidden networks may still be waiting, preparing to reclaim the system they once learned to control, using the very structure that allowed them to exist.